So yeah, it seems very strange to say, thank God I'm a Buddhist, because we don't talk much about God in the Buddhist practice. And some people think that Buddhism is even an atheistic religion, which is not true at all. The fact of the matter is that the Buddha pretty much ignored the whole concept of God, and he left it up to the individual to believe what he or she chose to believe in that particular regard. And the particular teaching that's appropriate, I think, to this is that of the poisoned arrow. Some of you may be familiar with it. And as the story goes, they were sitting around a campfire, and the Buddha's disciples were sitting there with him, and they began asking all sorts of speculative questions about, is there a God? Is there life after death? What's the ultimate nature of the universe? And on and on and on. You know, those ones we all ask, and I spent 27 years in a theological seminary asking those questions and never quite answering them. So the human mind likes to speculate on the big picture, if you will. What's it all about, Alfie? And so the Buddha was asked these questions many times, and again, he refused to answer. And he just remained silent. And sometimes the disciples would press him for an answer. And it's like, you know, Master, I'm sure you know the answer to these, or at least you have an opinion. And his response was in the form of a teaching known as the simile, or the teaching of the poisoned arrow. And he said, monks, he said, just imagine a man's walking through the forest, and suddenly he's shot in the back, and he recognizes immediately that the arrow is poisoned, and he's in grave danger. So his friends rush to him and go to pull out the arrow and administer an antidote. And he says, but wait, before you do that, I want to know what tribe and what caste the person was that shot the arrow. I want to know how tall he was. And I want to know what kind of wood the bow was made from, and what kind of wood the arrow was made from, and what kind of bird the feather was made from, and what kind of bark or sinew was used to, so on and so forth. And he goes on and on and on with all of these questions. And then he says, monks, tell me, what would happen to this man if he did this? And the monks said, well, surely he would die before all of his questions were answered. And so the Buddha said, and you too surely will die before all of your questions are answered. Basically, don't worry about it. Pull out the poisoned arrow. And what is the poisoned arrow? Well, the poisoned arrow is the arrow of suffering, of dukkha, of ignorance, of craving, of delusion, of resistance and hatred, and so on and so forth. So Buddhism does not forbid anybody to believe in a deity, and at the same time, it's fine if one does not. I have met several clergy who consider themselves to be Buddhist and also are active theists, Catholic monks, nuns, and priests, Protestant clergy. I know one person that's ordained as a Buddhist nun and as a Catholic nun, both. And there's no problem. So really the question is not so much about whether or not you choose to believe in God or anything else, life after death or reincarnation or whatever, any of the other speculative questions we ask that will never get answered. So the real question is, what purpose do beliefs serve? Human beings, of course, are believing beings. We have to believe in something, and of course, or we think we have to believe in something. Some people say, I don't believe in anything other than what I experience. But I would challenge that. I think that we all carry beliefs that we don't always think about, but they're assumptions that, you know, if you step out the window of a 5-story building, I believe it will do you harm. I have no proof of that. You can take that on faith, or you can try it yourself, you say. So we have beliefs, you know, and these beliefs are functional. You know, I believe when I go to my car and I turn on the ignition and with a button or a key, I believe it's going to start. Or I believe that my house is going to be there when I get to it, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we go to bed at night, we believe we're going to wake up in the morning. Right? I presume so. So we have functional beliefs, and those beliefs are part of our everyday life. And many of them are necessary, and many of those serve us. We also have beliefs that are not necessarily required, or sort of optional, if you will. That might be religious beliefs or political beliefs or beliefs about life on other planets or flying saucers or whatever else, you know. And those beliefs are more speculative. And the question is, what's our relationship to those beliefs? What's our relationship to our philosophy, our theology, the meaning we give to life? What's our relationship to our political beliefs? It's interesting today, it's like politics has replaced religion, is the thing people fight over. You know, when I was a kid, why people would argue over religion. You know, nobody argues over religion anymore because nobody goes to church. That's not quite true, but churches are not as popular as they were years ago. And but we seem to have the same passion for political beliefs that we did for religious beliefs decades ago. So should we carry beliefs or not? And so I guess to me the most skillful question is, how does this belief impact my life, and how does it serve me? You say, what's the practical aspect of this, and does it? The ultimate question is, does it add to suffering, or does it help me become free from suffering? That's the ultimate question, I think, with all that we think, say, and do. What leads to liberation, freedom? What leads to suffering? So let's say I have a particular political belief, and maybe I'm holding on to that very passionately, or a religious belief, as the case may be. You know, how is that impacting my life? I mean, in this moment, in the next moment, today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, how does this particular belief impact me? Well, maybe it impacts my life because I get into lots of arguments with family or friend. Or maybe it impacts my life because it gives me something to talk about at tea parties or cocktail parties or whatever. Or maybe this belief serves me because it's a way of connecting and bonding with other people. So looking at how these beliefs serve us and how they may separate us from one another. So I have a particular political belief, so how's that impacting my life? Well, it impacts my life in the way I vote. And maybe it impacts my life in some of my activities. But for the most part, it really doesn't impact my life. So, why am I so attached to it 24/7 when it only matters maybe one day every 4 years or a few days every couple of years? Does this particular belief serve me or do I serve it? Is it a tool or is it the master? So beliefs can be helpful, but to what extent do they add to suffering? To what extent do they diminish suffering? So, taking a look at our conversations, and particularly those things we become impassioned by and about. How is this serving me? Or is it? Much of the time, our beliefs reinforce our identity, our sense of self. In fact, our sense of self really is, in a way, a conglomerate of beliefs. What I call me is a sense of a body, a feeling of a body. And there's a whole lot of beliefs about this particular body. Some of these beliefs may be helpful and some may not. Some are irrelevant. But the more attached I am to those beliefs, the more attached I am to this sense of a separate self. The more attached I am to a sense of separate self, the more there's going to be fear and anger and hatred and hostility in my life. Because this particular self will die. This particular self perceives a world full of enemies and dangers. And how does this serve my life? Well, perhaps not very well. So looking at our beliefs, and particularly our beliefs about ourself and about our life. There's one great story Jack Kornfield tells in one of his books, or maybe I heard him tell it at a retreat. Doesn't matter, but anyway, the story is that when he was in Thailand, in a monastery, in the monastery is kind of a fancy word, but it was more of a small village of huts. And his teacher, Ajahn Chah, was the master. And so there were a couple of dozen monks in this community. And as it turns out, down the road, there was a Christian missionary had set up camp. And of course, his job there was to convert the heathens to Jesus. And he was doing that with great success. In fact, even some of the monks were joining the revival service. And so one of the monks was quite upset. You know, it's like we're losing all of our people to the, whatever they are, to the Christians. What are you going to do about it? And Ajahn Chah took a deep breath and said, well, maybe they're right. Maybe the Christians are right. Maybe the missionaries are right. You're not sure? Go check it out. See, he was not attached to, you've got to believe this to be a Buddhist. He was not attached to, oh my God, if they become Christians, I'm going to lose my community. Hey, check it out. So, looking at our belief systems and looking at how attached we are to our belief systems can be extremely helpful. Paradoxically, the beliefs that affect us the most are the ones we're not even aware of. Those deep unconscious beliefs that are part of our conditioning, part of our childhood conditioning, they impact our life enormously. And they impact our life far more than whether we believe there's God or Jesus or any political or religious belief. That's at the surface. That's just at the outer thin layer of the brain. But deep in the old brain, in the old memory, we have these beliefs about ourselves. I'm not okay, or I'm defective, or I can never get things done right. Or we believe things about other people in the world, that the world's a dangerous place, or you can't trust anyone. And those are the beliefs, particularly if we're not aware of them, that really impact our life and impact our suffering a great deal. So another paradox is that as we're present in the moment, and especially if we're continuously present for longer periods of time, then what happens is we begin to discover these deeper beliefs. That's one of the values of retreats, is we have an opportunity to practice continuously, which we can in the world too, it's just more difficult. But we have the opportunity to practice continuously and diligently for a longer period of time. And this brings up the deeper beliefs, and usually the deeper beliefs arise first in the form of an emotion. And even in our everyday life, we have emotions, of course. But typically our emotions are caught up in the story and in the relationship with who triggered that emotion. He made me angry. Do you know what he did? Let me tell you what he did. Okay, and away we go. As opposed to, what am I feeling? And what's the underlying belief? That's the real question. So it's not about needing to analyze or become our own psychotherapist, but it's about simply staying present with our experience, particularly those emotional experiences when we want to go out in some way, either in reaction or in some kind of attraction or need. When we're attached to something outside of ourselves, then it can be very, very helpful to stay with that, even if it's difficult, and just let it unfold and begin to look at the mental part of it. Staying with the body, emotions have a physical component, feeling that in the body, and then if we stay with that experience in the body, then the mental side or the belief side will show up eventually as well. And then we can choose whether or not we want to hold on to that belief. Most of the time we obviously don't. As soon as we are aware of it, it's like we're done with it. But we get angry with somebody that criticizes us. What's the belief under that? Well, ultimately the belief is maybe they're right. Maybe I am no good. Maybe I am defective. Maybe I am bad. We begin to see how we've clung to those beliefs based on experiences from our past, you see. So exploring our beliefs, again, not in an analytic way, not trying to think about it, but simply exploring our beliefs as they arise and being open to the arising of our beliefs. Particularly in times that we get triggered in one way or another, that can be extremely helpful. So if you want to get down on your knees and say, thank God I'm a Buddhist, or if you want to stand up and say, thank God I'm an atheist, or whatever you want to say, that's fine. But the ultimate question is, how is this impacting my life? Is it leading me to freedom, or is it leading me to deeper suffering? So thank you for sharing the Dharma with us today.